Welcome to the Team Engagement Podcast, where leaders of teams share their insights. Brought to you by Blue Sky Business Consulting. We discuss 5 questions in about 15 minutes. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Team Engagement Podcast, where leaders of teams share their insights. I'm excited to welcome Tracy Nolan. She is the Senior Vice President at Humana, and she's a very busy lady, and so I really appreciate her taking time to be with us today. Tracy, thank you so much. Tell us a little bit more about Humana or some of the other projects you're working on.
So, Shawn, thank you for having me here today. And I'm thrilled to work for Humana because it's really a company that focuses on how we can help people with their health outcomes. We specialize primarily in the Medicare, Medicaid insurance segments, and also we have our CenterWell assets.
Fantastic. Well, that's great. Very, very important to take care of our health. So we appreciate you helping all of us out with that. So that's great. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started with our questions. Tracy, sometimes that happens in a team. The energy levels kind of drop a little bit and there's a little bit of a lull there. What can leaders do to reignite some energy into their teams?
So first of all, I always believe that shadowing as a leader, your shadow, as you look at it, is your casting. So if your team is lolly, you need to look at yourself first to say, am I bringing the energy? And if I'm not, like they feed off of you. So you need to make sure that you're looking at yourself first. Then I really look at how, figuring out what is causing that lull. And a lot of times what you think it is not what it really is. So I do this thing where I hold a lot of team roundtable, small group sessions, all different levels in the organization. And I just ask one question, because if you ask people like, well, you just seem like something feels off, they're not going to necessarily answer. My favorite question is, if you had a magic wand or you became CEO tomorrow, what's the one thing you would change? Because when you ask that question, you will get the feel of what's causing the lull. And then once you know that, then you can go ahead and you can fix it. But you got to get underneath it and not just assume you know, but you really got to get out there and ask. And then also look at yourself. Because a lot of times the lull is coming because maybe you're overtired or maybe, something's been bothering you. And people pick up on it, whether you say it or not.
Great points. And I really like that you talked about kind of getting underneath it, because you're right. That first response is typically not the most genuine one. And so, yeah, it's important to really dig a little bit. I love that question that you asked too about what could you do if you wave the magic wand there, and what would you do differently? And that gives the individuals a chance to really think about, gee, what would I do differently? What is that number one thing that I would do? But great comments. Beautiful. All right, question number 2. How do you promote learning in your company?
This is an area that I think companies did really well many, many years ago, but it seems to have gone by a little bit by the wayside. In other words, there's tons of resources companies have where people can learn, but the time to be able to learn and to do some of that is really not, it's not as baked in as it used to be. So I was asked in yearly reviews, what is the 1 or 2 things you want to learn next year? And then I always look for what programs they could be. But I also, as I said, kind of cast the shadow on the leader. I'm always talking about what I'm learning. So during COVID, I decided that, hey, I had a pretty huge Hispanic base of employees working for me. And I decided I'm going to go take Spanish. And I let everybody know I was taking Spanish. I'm not good at it. But you know what? I went and I tried to learn. And some of the learnings that I do, it might be even like reading a book. I'm always telling people like, hey, I've just read that book. So it's kind of, again, casting the shadow that I'm always doing something. And I have found that I don't know, as I've become a more seasoned leader, I actually want to learn more. So I'm constantly trying to figure out. And so if you challenge your team to just take 2 things to learn every year, and if you do it and they do it to their teams, then it really starts to promote that learning, which really just helps the overall company kind of rise.
I really like that. And I absolutely agree with you that there has been a little bit of a downturn in recent years of businesses willing to either invest the time, the money, or both to give that space for their employees to learn something. And I love your example about learning Spanish, because that may not as readily come to mind to some people to think, hey, that may be something that we can do to be just a bit more inclusive, or to just increase the communication, something. It's an endeavor, and that's really what learning is about. Is let's see what we can do to contribute. Let's see what we can do to make work more meaningful for people, whatever the case may be. But I love that example. That's a great example. All right, question number 3. Share one tip for effective delegation.
This is the one thing that I think, I always say people come to me and say, hey, I want to do this work, but I need 3 more head count for it. Or it's always a head count. To do more, you always need more head count, right? So I do this thing where I call it doing, managing, and leading. And I believe that everybody needs to figure out in your role if they're like, from a delegation, you got to think about what role you're playing and make sure you're not doing too much of the doing or the too much of the managing. And that helps with delegation, like for leaders to start thinking about, wow, am I spending 70% of my time doing or managing when I should be leading? And I find when everybody just lifts up a little bit and really realizes where they're spending their time, they can actually get more time from it and you end up delegating more, especially new leaders who go into a role. You're more comfortable in doing what you were doing versus actually taking on the next step. And you kind of when stress happens, you go back to that doing or that managing versus really stepping up and leading. But it increases the capacity circle in your organization and helps you delegate at the same time. So sometimes I even take a piece of paper and say, just break down how much time you're spending in one of those, in all those 3 areas. And you look at it and you realize, wow, I'm spending too much time in one category versus the real important category. So that's kind of, Sean, one of my tips for helping with delegation. It's not like telling people to go have someone else do it, but taking a look. Again, I'm big on self-assessment because we all are not perfect. Any leader at any level, we always have areas of opportunity. So that's one I love to do.
Oh, I love that. It's such a great response. And you're right. There are those times where we do need to kind of retain a little bit, and sometimes we need to let go of a couple of things. But I love how you describe that there's some balance there, and you kind of have to know when to do it, when not to do it, and just find that balance that works for you and the others on the team. I think there's just no better way to say it. So that's great. All right. Question number 4. How do you or any leader effectively communicate things like purpose and vision and mission and some of those values and some of those things? How can those effectively be communicated to the rank and file?
Well, I think, for me, I have found I had a great mentor, Denny Striegel, who was CEO at Verizon at one point, because I spent many years in telco before moving to healthcare. And it was almost like, Sean, we would go into a meeting and I could probably tell you exactly what Denny was going to say, almost to the words, like when it came to vision and culture, he was so repetitive that he was almost boring at times, right? But like I knew what we stood for and I had a really clear vision and a purpose of where we were going to go. And if something was changing, he would tell us, but it was almost like he was repeating what he said over and over again. And I truly believe that, like, some of us at the time were like, oh boy, here we go again. But you know what? We all knew what it stood for and we were all clear. So as a leader, I always say, hey team, I might be boring. I might tell you the same story over and over again, but I do that because I want to make sure people see that we're steady, we're focused, because the vision should not be changing. Your purpose and vision for a company should not be changing that often. So I say over and over communicate. And then I always also am big on the why, like, why is this important? And that whole vision of why. And at times I know people say, oh, there she goes again. But you know what? I will tell you, we get great scores on our EAS, our employee annual survey results, that people are very clear on the vision and the purpose of where we're going.
I think that's absolutely fantastic because repetition, we sometimes think that it's bad to have repetition in something. Not necessarily. A lot of times when you're trying to drive a point home and really help it to sink in, you have to repeat it because it's not always going to sink in the first time or even the second or the third time sometimes. And so it's really important to do that. And yes, sometimes they get a little bit, the listeners, you might say, they get a little bit tired of hearing it. but I would like to think that it's sinking in when you do that. And so and hats off to you guys, because obviously throughout the entire organization, people are getting it. They're understanding the purpose and the vision. And I also agree with what you said, that those things this is a really important point for all of our viewers and listeners. The purpose and the vision really shouldn't change that often. That's like if you're a 20, 30-year company, maybe it's once or twice during that time.
Right.
But it's very rare that you should have to change that. If you're changing that every other year or something like that, that's probably too much. So that's something to think about that Tracy pointed out that I think is really important to think about. All right, Tracy, I'm excited. Last question, the baseball story. Share with us a baseball story that you got.
Okay. So are you ready for this story? Because this
I
one's a
hope
good
so.
one. So I had the opportunity to throw out a pitch at a Cubs game.
No way.
I did, but I got to tell you, Shawn. So I love going to baseball games, and there was nothing like going to a Cubs game. I'm from upstate New York originally, moved to Chicago, and I got to go to a Chicago game. And sitting in Wrigley to me is kind of like having a big party, because everybody talks to each other. Like everybody is together talking. And so I love to go to Cubs game. And then I was working for Verizon, and I had an opportunity. They said, "Hey, would you go throw out a pitch?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I get to do this." And I actually had a jersey with Nolan on the back, but I was out at every lunch, every morning, every lunchtime, because I only had 2 weeks notice, trying to make sure that I could get that pitch across, into without it hitting the ground. And I did it. It was like just maybe this far off the ground, but I will tell you, that is my baseball story, and I'm excited to share with it, because it was pretty cool. It's one of those very memorable experiences.
Oh yeah, I'm very envious, I must admit, because that might be the best story I've heard so far on the podcast. Hopefully I won't offend anybody, because I've heard some really good ones. But that's an exceptional story. Not too many people that you're the first one that I've ever known that has ever thrown out the first pitch. And I would be just like you. If I ever had that opportunity, I'd be out there practicing for 2 weeks. And I played baseball in high school, so I'm no slouch, but I'm also about 40 years older than I was back then. So I got to get the old arm warmed back up there if I were ever to do that. But that's a great story.
I was definitely, I was excited about it, but then I also knew that I was going to have like 40 people who worked for me there.
Yeah.
The pressure of it was pretty big, but I was like, I can do this. I can get this done. So it was great.
Good for you.
It was
That's
great.
awesome. I happen to remember if the Cubs won that day.
They did win that day. I remember, and it was against the Yankees, so it was a big game. It was a big game.
Yeah,
Big game.
that's fantastic.
Big game.
Well,
Yeah.
good day all around then. That's
Yeah.
the way to do it. All
Yeah.
thanks to your first pitch, right? That's how.
Exactly. I started it out right.
That's right. The right foot, the right pitch. That's awesome. That's a great story. Thank you for sharing it. And again, Tracy, thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to join us on the podcast. How can people find you?
So you can find me through my LinkedIn at Tracy Nolan, or I do have a webpage, which I'm really big into helping and mentoring, leaders, because I feel very fortunate that I've had some great people who've helped me in my career. So please look at just Tracy Nolan at .com, and would love to hear from you.
Fantastic. And just for those who are listening as opposed to watching and cannot see how she spells her name, it's TracyL or NOLAN.com. So anyway, thank you so much, Tracy. And thanks to all of you who are so faithful in listening and hopefully implementing the things that you're hearing about here on the Team Engagement Podcast. We are looking forward to another great year and another great season next year. And we'll have one more episode after this one that will air here in 2025. And then we look ahead to 2026. But thanks to all of you who are following us, subscribing and watching, and hopefully implementing to become better leaders. Thanks so much to all of you, and have a great day. This is Shawn Richards with the Team Engagement Podcast, where leaders of teams share their insights. For more ideas, go to teamengagementpodcast.com. We also invite you to follow or subscribe to our podcast wherever you may be listening or watching. Is your business thriving? Go to tbs-score.com to find out. Thanks for joining us today. Have a great day.